Hey, thanks for joining us online today. We believe that Jesus wants to do so much through you and for you, and we'd love to hear about how he's working in your life. Please take a second to email your story to stories@rise-church.com. We hope this message leaves you feeling uplifted and encouraged. Enjoy.
Listen, week 2 we are in of this series called Confessions of a Pastor. And last week we kicked things off, and I just shared this simple message of this, that my confession to you, and this is kind of the idea of the series, of me just sharing some struggles that I deal with in my own life, and opening my heart to you, and then kind of walking you through how I work through these struggles in my life. And last week's message was this: I don't always know. I don't always know where God's leading me. I don't always know what God's doing in my life. I don't always know how he's going to work something out in my life, and I don't always know why he allows things to happen in my life. But we came to the conclusion last week that we don't always need to know the where, the what, the how, and the why, as long as we know the who, the one who is in control of all things in my life. And so I hope that that gave you some hope and some confidence that God is in control. He loves you, he knows you, he cares for you, and he is working whether you understand it or not. And it's okay that you have questions. God can handle that. And sometimes he gives you the answers, and sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes we won't understand until the other side of heaven, you know what I'm saying? And so today we're going to work through another confession. I'm just going to share with you my heart. And anytime, just so you know, anytime you see me pull a table and a stool up here, you just know that this is going to be a little bit more of a heavier sermon than others. And so today's going to be a little bit heavier, a little bit deeper, but I believe that God's going to speak to your heart in this today. And so let me just share like this. I kind of wrote down 3 different sermon titles for this. The first one I wrote down is, I don't always feel like I have what it takes. I don't always feel like I have it all together. And honestly, sometimes I just don't feel like I'm good enough. And when I was reflecting on this sermon and just writing it down, I started thinking, well, God, like, this could be a 10-week series because I am so messed up. I got a lot of stuff that I could confess to you guys. And honestly, what I really want to share with you is just like, hey, here's my heart, and just be very vulnerable. I have a pastor in my life that told me, Adam, always lead with vulnerability. Let people come into your hurt and their pain and your pain, because then they'll open up and they'll share some hurt and pain in their own life. And if I could confess to you, like, this has been a really hard week as the pastor of this church. We've walked through some really dark days with some people in our church, some friends that are just struggling right now. They're just hurting, and when you hear the stories and you see the hurt and the pain in their eyes and you hear it in their heart, like, you enter into that, and man, it just weighs on you. And this week became even more real because a pastor, a well-known pastor and author in our country that suffered and dealt with depression and mental illness, took his own life. And anytime that you hear that about a pastor, like, as a fellow pastor, like, that just kind of like wakes you up a little bit. And this guy, like, he wasn't even hiding this stuff. Like, he like, people knew that he suffered through this and that he dealt with it. He was even helping other people in the process of him dealing with it himself. But in a moment of weakness, like, he took his own life, and it just was an eye opener. And I'm not here to confess to you that I struggle with that. That's something I have not personally dealt with on really any major levels. But God just kind of shared it with me to say, like, maybe there's somebody who has and who currently is. Somebody this past worship experience during the 10 o'clock, I saw them leaving. They were walking out to the parking lot, and then I saw them circle back. And as a pastor, like, anytime you see somebody circle back, like, they're making a beeline for you, and like something's going on, and she just broke down and said, that was me. I needed to hear that, and I need to talk to somebody about it. And we were able to pair her. We have a small group for that in our church, and if there's even more stuff that you're dealing with, like we can help you find help. And I think that the church needs to get to a place, and this is what we worked so hard in this place to create, is a place where, hey, it's okay if you're not okay. And if you're going through something, like, let us know. We're not going to judge you. We're going to love you and help you in any way that we can, because God, thank you that you loved me and you helped me when I needed you, when I was at my worst. And so if you're struggling with that, man, let somebody know today. Don't leave this place keeping that to yourself. The enemy would love for you to walk that road alone. You were never meant to. I asked this girl, I said, what triggered it? She said, nothing. It just started happening. And I think sometimes we want to look for, like, we want to explain it like, well, this is why. It's bigger than that. It's bigger. And it's real, and we want to help you if we can. Sometimes in my own life, I just feel like I'm not good enough at being a dad to my kids, a husband to my wife, a pastor to you. Sometimes I just feel like I'm not good enough at being a Christian. Come on, raise your hand if you've ever felt like you just aren't good enough in some area of your life. Come on, I think if we wrote out a sentence, I'm not good enough at, we could fill in the blank with multiple things. Sometimes it's the same reoccurring thing that we would keep writing in the blank. Like, this is the one issue where I just constantly feel like I don't have what it takes, that I don't have it all together, that I'm not good at this. And here's what I know about God. He is really good, extremely good at stepping into moments of your life where you don't feel good enough, and he'll say, I can take that and I can work with that. And I can take the things that you feel weak in, and I can use my strength in your life to show off my glory and how great I am. And so I just want to speak a word of hope and encouragement into you today. I want to look at 3 stories in the Bible where we just see some people that just didn't feel like they had what it takes, that they weren't good enough, and how God stepped in and just did something crazy awesome in their life. And so the first one, if you have a Bible, you can go ahead and turn to Luke chapter 5 is where we're going to be. Luke chapter 5, starting in verse 1. We're going to read a lot of scripture here, so just track with me. Luke chapter 5, verse 1. One day, Jesus was standing by the lake that I can't pronounce. The people were crowding around him and listening. Come on, track with me. Let's go, 11:30. To the word of God. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats. Now, we could just read over this really quickly and not think anything about it, but this is a little weird. Jesus just got in a boat, okay? He didn't ask anybody. He just got in. If you're like, not a big deal, why don't you try that today when you leave church, okay? Just get in somebody else's car. Just see how that works out for you. And we're from the west side, so I wouldn't suggest it, okay? We find out whose boat he got into is a guy named Simon, who we know to be the disciple named Peter. It says the one belonged to Simon, and now he's going to ask something. He asked him to put out a little from the shore. There were so many people there that Jesus couldn't teach from the shore anymore. He actually had to get in a boat because people always want to be where Jesus is. I think that's the problem of our church. People want to be where Jesus is. We got so many people coming to our church because Jesus is doing something in your life, and people want to see the Jesus that's changed you, and so they come into this place, and then Jesus changes them, and then they go and tell people, and domino effect, 4 worship experiences. What are we going to do? I don't know. It says, then he sat down and he taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put out into deep water. And he let down the nets for a catch. Simon answered, Master, we've worked hard all night and we haven't caught a thing. But because you say so, I will let down the nets. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, Get away from me, Lord. I'm a sinful man. Peter realized that he was standing in the presence of greatness. And in that moment, all he could see was himself and how messed up he was. All he could see was his past mistakes, his past failures, his present circumstances, and he realized who Jesus was, and his only response was, get away from me. I don't even deserve to be around you right now. And I love in verse 8, all Peter sees is his past. But in verse 10, Jesus looks to Peter's future and he speaks into his life. And he says these words, Simon, don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people. So they pulled their boats up on the shore and left everything and followed him, because Jesus isn't looking for the superstars. He's looking for those whose hearts are surrendered. This is why God uses certain people in greater ways than he uses other people, because sometimes some people are more surrendered to God than others are. And God says, I don't need somebody that has it all together. I just need somebody who is surrendered to me and will step out in obedience into what I'm calling them to do. I'm not looking for the superstar. I'm just looking for the one that's willing to surrender. And so if you're here this morning and you're like, I am definitely not a superstar Christian, then God can use you. But he needs your heart surrendered to him so that he can use you. We read on, and we find another story in John chapter 6. And if you've grown up in church, you know this story. If you didn't grow up in church, you probably have heard this story. It's the story where Jesus feeds thousands of people. You know the one where the disciples bully that little kid and they steal his lunch and like, give me your lunch, boy. And they take his bread and the fish and they give it to Jesus and he multiplies it and he feeds thousands of people. And in John chapter 6, starting in verse 1, it says, sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him. Again, a crowd always wanted to be around Jesus. Do you see the repetition in this? Like Jesus always draws a crowd. When we lift up Jesus, he's going to bring the people. And they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and he sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? This was a Jesus juke, okay? He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Do you know that when God looks at your life, he already has in mind what he wants to do with you? He's not pacing in heaven going, what am I going to do with them? What am I going to do? I don't know. Look how messed up they are. What am I going to do with them? He's probably thinking, what am I going to do with the Seminoles? I don't know what they're going to do with them. There's just no hope. I don't know what I'm going to do with them. But when he looks at you, he knows exactly what he wants to do with you. Come on, God says, I already got in mind what I want to do in you. He was testing them. And Philip did not pass the test. Philip says, Jesus, man, it would take more than a half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. Verse 7, Philip saw the problem. Verse 6, Jesus already knew the solution. I think sometimes in our own lives, we just look at ourselves as the problem. Well, this situation's just too great for me. Yeah, it is too great for you. But there's a God that's greater than anything that you could ever face. Stop looking at yourself and start looking to Jesus and saying, Jesus, this looks hopeless, but you're the hope of the world, and I just need you to step into this moment in my life. I think we live in a society where all we do is look at the negative. The glass is always half empty. All the news reports on all the negative things that are going on in our world, and we never want to talk about the positive things. You could have had 6 great days this week where your faith was in God, where you trusted him, where your eyes were locked in on him, but then you had that one day where your faith was just doubting God, and you took your eyes off of him, and you put it on something else, and you fell, and you struggled, and you want to beat yourself up because of that one day instead of rejoicing and saying, thank you, God, for 6 good days. But the problem is we only want to look at the negative. We only want to see the problem. And God's saying, no, I'm greater than the problem. I already know what I want to do in your life. You just need to look to me, set your eyes on me, surrender your heart to me, and watch me work in you. Let's read on. Matthew 14, it's the same exact story, but the author tells it in a little bit of a different way. John the Baptist has just died. Jesus is sad about it, and this is what it says in Matthew 14, verse 13. When Jesus heard what had happened, that's with John the Baptist, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds, again, come on somebody, they followed him because they wanted to be around Jesus. They followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, and he healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, this is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. Jesus replied, they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. The disciples looked at this large crowd and said, hey, we can't feed these people. They need to go get some of their own food. Jesus said, no, you do it. Some of you got somebody in your workplace right now that drives everybody crazy. And your prayer is, God, would you just send somebody to just, talk to them? God, would you just send somebody? They just need some help, God. And God's saying, yeah, I'm going to send somebody. You. Students, you go to lunch every single day of the school year, and you see that kid that sits alone, and you're like, man, somebody should go sit with that kid and make you do it. There's a student in your school that gets bullied by other kids and picked on, and you're like, man, somebody should be nice to them. Yeah, you. You got a family member. Oh, man, they just drive me crazy. Somebody else is going to have to intervene. I can't deal with them. No, God's saying, you do it. You show them grace. You show them love. You show them forgiveness. I want to use you. Don't put it off on somebody else. You do it. Well, this church is growing, man. They're going to need some more volunteers. Heck yeah, we are. You do it. Go through the growth track. Discover your purpose. My 6-year-old is in the growth track right now. I got adults that ain't going to do it. Don't make me come off this stage. Come on. We're growing. That's a problem. It's a good problem. We're adding a 4th service. Guess what? We only got volunteers enough for 3 services right now. Where are we going to find them? Well, maybe God will send them. No, you do it. Let God use you. Because he's ready to. He's ready to. Last story I want to look at. Old Testament. Exodus chapter 3. My boy Moses. You probably heard this story before, even if you hadn't grown in church. Moses had a past. Moses was messed up. Moses killed a dude in anger one day. Like, that's messed up. And God said, I can still work with that. Moses is out in the field one day, and off in the distance, he sees this fire. He sees this bush that's burning, but it's not being consumed by the fire. And he's like, I need to take a closer look at that. He walks up, and now the bush starts talking to him. Moses is like, man, that Taco Bell last night is messing with me. Because this bush right now I am tripping right now. And he realizes, no. This is God. And God starts having a conversation with Moses through this burning bush. And this is what God says to Moses. Verse 7, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. And I am concerned about their suffering. The Hebrew people, God's people, have been in slavery for hundreds of years. And God's saying, I'm going to do something about it. Why didn't he do something about it sooner? I don't know. But he's about to do something about it now. He says, so I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. I don't even know what that means, but it sounds good. The home of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Scaredivites, the Headlites, the Jedi-nites, like a bunch of ites up in here. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me. And I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. And you're thinking in that moment that Moses is like, yes, let's do this. Can I get some of this fire bush that I can walk around with and throw it at Pharaoh? Like, come on, God, I'm going to do this. I'm going to lead them out. Moses didn't have that confidence. Why? Because all Moses was thinking about was himself. All Moses was thinking about was his past and how messed up he was. And he says this, hey, God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And if I'm God in that moment, I'm saying, Moses, it ain't about who you are. It's about who I am. And God goes on to tell Moses, like, I'm going to do this. Like, you're just being the one I'm sending, but I'm the one that's going to do this. But all Moses could see was himself. He forgot about the bush that was burning on fire, and all he thought about was his own shortcomings. You know, there's a lot of scholars that believe that Moses had a stuttering problem. And so he probably was a little nervous to go before Pharaoh. And I'm not trying to make fun of anybody, but to stand before, he would probably already be a little scared, and then he wouldn't be able to get the words out. And so Moses is looking at his own life and his own weaknesses. When I was born, I had to have some surgery in my mouth because just some stuff wasn't right. And so I was born with surgery, and I have a cleft palate, which just means I have a hole in the roof of my mouth. And it's closed up. Like, I can't stick my tongue up through my nose or anything. Like, if you're thinking that, you're weird. And I I didn't realize that not everybody had this until I was about 20 years old. And I was talking to a friend of mine. I was like, man, it's so annoying, when food gets stuck up in the hole in your mouth. And he was like, what are you talking about? I was like, like the hole up in your mouth, like, when food gets up there, it's annoying. He's like, I don't have a hole in my mouth. I was like, you don't? I do. He was like, let me see. I was like, and if you want to see, I'll be out in the lobby. I'll show you. And he was like, gross, man. I was like, you don't have that? And he showed me. I was like, what? I go home and I talked to my mom. She's like, yeah, you had surgery when you were a baby, cleft palate, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I never knew. It was good for hiding gum in high school. You chewing gum, Peterson? Just stick it up in there. And the doctors actually told my parents, hey, your son's probably going to have to go through a lot of speech therapy classes. He probably is never going to be able to talk right. He's probably going to always have issues with his speech. And I just think the sense of humor that the Lord has, that the doctors spoke this over my life as a baby because of a surgery that I had, because of what history would tell of other kids that maybe have dealt with this. But from the beginning of time, I have a Father in heaven who looked down on my life and said, no, I've got a calling on Adam's life. I'm going to use him to speak my love and my grace and my goodness over people so that they will hear it and be drawn to it. And I think that sometimes God will take those things that look like weaknesses or those diagnoses that other people want to put on us and go, no, that's the very thing that I'm going to use to bring myself glory. See, that's the testimony of us as the church. Like, nobody gets to walk up here, nobody can grab this microphone and go, well, look how awesome I am, and that's why God used me greatly. No, our story is this. I was a mess. Look how jacked up my life was. Look at the pit that I had put myself in. Look at the path that I have gone down. Look at the destruction that I had caused my life and so many other people's lives. That's your part of the story, is just to tell how messed up you are. And then you get to come in and you get to tell God's part of the story. But my God loved me too much that he looked down on me and said, I've got something far better for you. And I'm going to take all that mess and I'm going to turn it in to your message. And that's what makes the church beautiful, and that's what makes God's glory just so much awesome. Like, it's all about him. So when we get to tell the story of our church and people are like, man, your church is growing, it's so amazing. Like y'all must be doing a lot of stuff right. Yeah, we're doing a lot of stuff right, but can I just tell you, God is doing everything. This is his idea. Like this was like, God's been thinking about Rise Church a lot longer than I have. And God is so incredible because even in your life, he's been thinking about you and what he wants to do in you a lot longer than you have. And he knows all your weaknesses. He knows all your shortcomings. He knows that you aren't good enough, that you don't have what it takes, but he does. And he wants to use you. He wants to use you. I just want to share this in closing. This is going to set somebody free. When you often feel like you're not good enough, when you often have those feelings in your life, in whatever area of your life it is, sometimes you'll fish for compliments from other people to try to fulfill you. Like, I don't feel like I'm a good mom. So you post on Facebook a picture of you with your kids and how you made PB&J sandwiches and you cut them like stars and, you made constellations and everything. And, oh, you're such a great mom. Like, comment. But you feel like a failure and you fish for those compliments. There are never enough compliments that anybody can give you. Not your husband, not your wife, not your friends, not your family, not your kids, not anybody. To bring you what you really need, which is to hear the voice of your Father God speak his love and approval over your life. You don't need to hear what somebody else has to say about you. You need to hear what God says about you, because I am not who you say I am. I am who you say I am. Nothing more, nothing less. I'm a son. I belong to you. I'm a part of the family. You're my father. You love me. You're proud of me. That's what you need to hear this morning. Would you stand?
Thanks for watching today. If you'd like to continue the conversation, you can like us on Facebook or follow us on Instagram. If our church has had an impact on you and you'd like to support what Jesus is doing here, you can do so by going to rise-church.com/give and select the giving option that best suits you. Thanks for watching online and have a great week.